When I first started getting into photography, it was not uncommon for me to return home from a trip, and after downloading my images and sorting through them, start to feel a little bit disappointed or a little bit down on myself. And I was feeling that way because I was comparing my photographs with photos from professional photographers that I was seeing in some of these popular photography magazines at the time. So, wanting to improve my photography, I would sit down and compare my photos side by side with these professional photographers, and I would make a list and write down all the things that I was doing wrong, or more importantly, that these photographers were doing right to make their photos so outstanding. And I realized more or less that these photographers were actually following a formula. And I was able to condense this down into 7 different steps, or a 7-part formula that I was able to recreate to take outstanding photos myself, with the first one being location. Being realistic, your backyard is probably not an award-winning photo location. I'm sure that there are plenty of people who disagree with me and who will tell you that you can get amazing photos around your city or your neighborhood. And while you don't necessarily have to travel to far-flung locations to take great photos, I think if you're just sticking to your city or your neighborhood, then it's probably only good for practice or personal fulfillment. Maybe this seems a little callous, but when was the last time you were scrolling through Instagram and wowed by a photo taken from the suburbs of Omaha, Nebraska?
Whoa, that's a lot of corn.
Now, I'm not saying that you need to book the next one-way ticket to Mogadishu to step up your photography game, but I do think you need to travel to somewhere that other people find interesting. There are some places like The Wave or Mesa Arch, which are essentially guaranteed to get you a banger shot, but I also suggest going to places that are not already super popular. This does take additional time and research, but having a photo from a location that people are not used to seeing will help your photography stand out. This next step is all about the perfect lighting, which might sound obvious, but capturing the best light is oftentimes not just about being there for sunrise and sunset. One of the most important aspects of photography is not only the time of day you're shooting, but also the angle of the light you're shooting. You'll often see that some of the most dramatic photos from professional photographers are done so shooting into the sun rather than away from it. For many locations, it's actually not just the time of day, but also the time of year, which factors into how the light works on the landscape. Take, for instance, the north rim of the Grand Canyon around solstice, where the sun actually rises and sets so far north that any viewpoint on the canyon will not receive direct light during sunrise or sunset. There's even some instances of places where the right light literally happens on a few days or a single day of the year. The de facto tool most photographers use is the PhotoPills app, but there's also things like Plan It Pro and the photographer's ephemeris. This next step is a reminder to cover all your grounds. If you look at most professional landscape photos, almost all of them are going to have a very clear foreground, middle ground, and background. When I arrive at a location and I'm looking to capture a grand landscape, the subject has already been identified, and I usually more or less already know the angle I'm going to be shooting from. Knowing this, the first thing I usually do when arriving to a new location is, instead of focusing on the bigger picture, is I start looking around and scouting around for different foreground elements. Is that a bunch of wildflowers? Is it some nice leading lines? Is it a cactus or a reflection or ice crystals? Having a strong foreground will naturally lead the viewer's eye into the middle ground and eventually the background or subject of your photograph. This next one cannot be underestimated, and that is paying attention to the weather. If you are shooting outside, the weather is going to dictate how and what you are shooting. If there's 40-mile-per-hour winds outside, then it's probably not a good day for long exposures or astrophotography, but it might be a great day for capturing dramatic images of sand dunes. This is also important for seascape photography, where you're going to want to pay attention to tide tables. I have a ton of weather apps on my phone to help decide where to go and what to shoot. Some of my favorite ones are Radar Scope for thunderstorms, Ventusky for predicting cloud models, and Aurora Alerts for forecasting the northern lights. Now I understand that unless you're a full-time photographer, it might be a little bit more difficult to change where and what you're shooting on a whim, so if you're more of a weekend warrior or a hobbyist, you can instead focus on things that have a little bit more predictability, like seasonal events. Every season is going to bring something different to photograph, so it's up to you as the photographer to capitalize on these seasonal changes. The most obvious ones are fall colors and spring wildflowers, where you can use different apps and social media groups to find out when blooms are happening or when peak colors are predicted. But there's also more unique seasonal events like capturing animal migrations, harvest times, capturing waterfalls after a rain, knowing which season's fog is more likely, or even when cultural events are happening. So let's say that you have a week off in July that you can plan a photo trip around. Well, it can be beneficial to research what sort of unique things you're interested in photographing around that time and plan or choose your destination off of that. So the next thing that professional photographers know is that uniqueness stands out. Every day there are hundreds of millions of photos uploaded to different social media platforms, and of course some of them are going to look the same. So it is up to you to find something about your photography to make it stand out from the millions of others. Simply being unique is a pretty broad statement, but this uniqueness can come in a ton of different ways. It could be the colors that are making a photo stand out. It could be a location that people have never seen before. It could be a popular place but captured from an angle that's new. It could be an atmospheric event. So whatever it is, your photographs need something about them to be unique in order to stand out from the rest. It might be a harsh reality, but if there's not at least one unique thing about your photo, people are much more likely to just scroll on past it. So speaking of harsh realities, it is a difficult fact to accept that in order to compete with the millions of other photographers out there, you need to get good at editing your images, or you need to be good at Photoshop. Except for a few rare cases, every single stunning photograph you've seen has had some level of manipulation. It took me a while to understand this, but at some point I realized that I was never going to have photos like Mark Adamus or Isabella Tabacci without becoming at least somewhat proficient with Photoshop. Now, you don't need to be a Lightroom master or Photoshop guru to produce award-winning work, but I do believe that as a photographer, to make your photographs stand out, you need to have a basic understanding of editing concepts. This isn't a new idea though. Photo editing has been going on since the film era. If you think Photoshop is complicated, check out these editing notes from a film photo. We're just lucky enough now that we don't have to sit in a dark room full of chemicals in order to achieve our artistic vision. Your camera shoots in some sort of a RAW file format, and the name RAW literally means that it's uncooked or it's unprocessed, and it's up to you as the photographer to put that processing into it. Truly, guys, by following these 7 steps, I have been able to produce award-winning photographs, and I absolutely sucked at the beginning, so I know if you follow these, it will work for you as well. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.